So I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Jeff Burkhart. Jeff was born in Monongahela Rye Country, Western Pennsylvania, where American liquor in the form of rye whiskey itself was born. Moving to California with his family, he cut his teeth literally in Berkeley. Jeff spent many years in the restaurant and entertainment industry, and as a writer, he has published the book 20 Years Behind Bars, which is part trade manual and part psychological introspective. Later published 20 Years Behind Bars, Volume 2, Parole Denied, which combines real-life observations by a real-life bartender and information in an amusing and irreverent fashion. In early 2006, Jeff began writing his weekly Barfly column for the Marin Independent Journal. Barfly has since, in one form or another, graced the pages of newspapers from the San Jose Mercury News to the Tallahassee Democrat, and been features in magazines such as San Francisco Magazine, National Geographic Assignment, Capture, and Marin Magazine. He is both an award-winning journalist and an award-winning bartender, and currently splits his time in Northern California between writing, family, bartending, podcasting on Barfly Podcast on iTunes, and research. So please welcome Jeff Burkhart.
Hi, everybody. Well, thank you very much for having me. This is always great to be part of the Moya Library and the Lost Historical Society. We did an event some years back that was live and in person, which was a little more fun because we could actually have the cocktails, but we've been making some cocktails at home. Hopefully some of you guys are following along. We're going to kind of localize the contents of these cocktails, but the basic gist of them is a historical perspective from Marin County. Now, a lot of people don't know that Marin County has quite a bit of liquor and alcohol history involved. One of the largest distilleries in the United States for a very long time was American Distilling, which was located in Sausalito and burned down in, I think it was 1963. But it was one of the few distilleries that survived Prohibition and lasted all the way through there. Changed names a couple of times over the years, and they were the ones who they produced what was called medicinal whiskey, which I actually have a unsealed bottle of Prohibition era medicinal whiskey with its dosing cap, which is hilarious. So at any rate, some of the other things that have happened was that Cocktail Boothby, who wrote the famous book, How to Mix Drinks, actually wrote his book. He's known as a San Francisco bartender, but he actually wrote the book while working at the Rafael Hotel in San Rafael, which was a luxury getaway over there in Dominican. It burned down in the 20s, and the only thing that remains of it are two brick pillars along the road there. You can see them when you drive through right past Dominican there by the freeway underpass. There's two old brick and mortar pillars, and that's all that remains of the famous Rafael Hotel, which had its own storied history, which I highly recommend anyone look up and look into. But he wrote his book on how to be a bartender while working as a bartender in Marin County, which is a underreported thing. Although Anchor Distilling, actually, which was located in San Francisco, it's now Hotlings, had actually republished his book, which was kind of nice. And the funny thing is, the first review on Amazon is a review I wrote for it for the IJ. So I always get a kick out of that. And the other thing is that the assistant editor's name was Dave Burkhart, which is the same name as my stepfather. So I always have to go out of my way and point out that I have no relation to that person. So another great thing that happened in Marin County was the first bottling ever of vintage California port happened at Woodbury Distilling, which used to be over in Greenbrae, or San Rafael, excuse me, right before the Greenbrae interchange there. So he had bottled, and this is actually the bottle, unopened, 1977 California vintage port, the first one ever bottled in the United States. The first vintage port ever bottled in the United States was bottled here in Marin County, which is a little piece of history. So, but for this talk, we set out a couple of things because there's some other historical figures one of which is a little controversial right now because of the renaming of Sir Francis Drake School and potential ideas around the road. But the bottom line is that that Sir Francis Drake, good or bad, was a historical figure who quite possibly did land here in Marin County. There's a lot of speculation over whether he actually did or whether it was further up the coast. But people don't understand that he also was the inventor of the mojito, which happened after he had landed here and he had gotten back to England, had been knighted, and had returned with a squadron to Cuba and was actually shelling the town of Havana when his crew put together a drink with the local mint, the local lime, and what they called aguardiente, which means hard water, and essentially was a raw form of rum. So that drink was called the El Drac because, of course, Drake means dragon, and El Drac means the dragon, which was his nickname as a pirate or a privateer. Now, as a little bit of a funny note, I picked Batiste rum, which is a local product, partly because Batiste himself was also a privateer or a pirate. He was French, and the idea was it all depends on perspective, right? You're either a good guy or a bad guy, depending on who's writing the story. So at any rate, one big difference about rum is there's two kinds of rum. There's rum, R-U-M, which is made typically from molasses, and then there's rum, R-H-U-M, which is made from free-run sugarcane juice. So they taste slightly different. R-H-U-M, rum, has more of a fresher flavor, where typical molasses rum has more of a molasses flavor, as one would expect. So we're going to use the Batiste rum, and we're going to make the classic El Drac cocktail, modified, of course, for modern sensibilities, because I highly doubt they had a soda water at the time. So we're going to go ahead and start off with filling our glass with ice. We're going to add 1.5 ounces, excuse me, not 1.5 shots of Batiste white rum. Then we're going to add about an ounce of fresh squeezed lime juice. Always use fresh squeezed juices. It makes all the difference in the world. The only ones you can't really do are pineapple juice, which you don't really want a fresh squeezed pineapple juice anyhow, but all other citrus juices should always be fresh. So we've got 1.5 ounces of rum, an ounce of fresh squeezed lime juice, and then we're going to add a little bit of simple syrup, about 1/2 ounce. So simple syrup is really just a combination of sugar and water brought to a boil and then allowed to cool. So what that does is it creates a more viscous product. And that the problem with sugar is sugar doesn't readily dissolve in alcohol. It takes water to dissolve. So you need to pre-dissolve it. That's why if you remember the old-fashioned drinks, when you put a sugar cube in and put whiskey in, it gets kind of gritty. And that's not a desirable characteristic. Now, one of the things about building a mojito that a lot of people don't do is they put the mint in and then they muddle it. They mash it up into a little paste. And what that does is turn it into a kind of a wet, soggy mess, almost like cooked spinach. I find that to be unappealing, and it doesn't actually enhance the drink to muddle up the drink. Mint is an aromatic. There's two basic kinds. There's spearmint and then there's peppermint. Peppermint is a smaller leaf like this, and spearmint is a larger leaf, which is quite large, almost the size of a basil leaf. What you want to do is destem your mint and then just gently tear it. Put it on top of the drink. And if you smell that, it is unbelievably aromatic. That's all you need. You're going to then shake this just to combine it. You're going to pour it into your serving glass, add a little more ice. Top it with some soda water, which I had. Where'd my soda water go? And very importantly, get all your equipment. Stir it. Because once you top it with soda water, if you just drink it, it's going to taste weak if you don't stir it. Now you're going to garnish it with a little lime wheel. and the top of a mint plant. And there you have it, an El Drac or a mojito. I'm going to read you a little story which will explain a little bit about what mojito means and a little bit more about the El Drac connection. So this story is from my first book, 20 Years Behind Bars, which had just been released when I had done that original presentation at the library. So this is called the El Drac. The couple coming in the front door held it open just a little too long, allowing the blast furnace heat of the late afternoon sun to overpower the furiously working air conditioning. The few people sitting at the bar looked up through heat-addled eyes and muttered a barely audible curses under their breath at the couple. Soon the air conditioning had begun to mount its cooling counterattack, and calm and serenity returned to the patrons at the bar. I stood in front of my little fan, hidden in the recesses under the bar, feeling the sweat run down the middle of my back. I don't know what part of San Francisco Mr. Mark Twain was thinking of when he wrote his famous quote about summers in SF, but I'm sure it wasn't around here. Eventually, one of my guests finished the remains of their cocktail, and I was forced to move away from my wind-blowing little friend. "Boy, it's hot in here," said the lady in a spaghetti-strapped tank top and shorts. "Do you think it's hot?" she asked me. I stood there in my long-sleeved, non-breathing polyester shirt, cinched at the neck with a tie and covered with an equally non-breathing pleated vest, all topped off with an ankle-length white apron, and thought to myself, of course I think it's hot. Can't you see what I'm wearing? What I actually said, however, was quite different. "Yeah, it seems a little warm in here," I answered as pleasantly as my approaching heat stroke would allow. "Can't you do something about it?" she said. Gee, I never thought of that. Some people like to point out the obvious, as if they're the only ones that are smart enough to figure these things out. I explained to her that the fans were on and the air conditioning was on full blast, but it was 104 degrees outside, and as long as people were going to come in or go out through the front door, we were only going to get the building so cool. "Can't you stop people from coming in?" she asked me in all seriousness. I looked at her with all my being, trying not to have an incredulous look on my face. "Why don't you try something cool to drink instead?" I mentioned. Soon she settled on a mojito, the classic summer cooler. The mojito is one of Cuba's oldest cocktails, reportedly named after the African word mojo, which means to place a little spell. It also has a strong Bay Area connection. The story is that in 1586, when Sir Francis Drake's pirate ship, the Golden Hind, yes, the Drake of Drake's Bay, tried to sack the city of Havana, one of his underlings, Richard Drake, invented a mojito-like cocktail made with the aguardiente, sugar, distilled forerunner of rum, sugar, lime, and mint that he modestly named the El Drac. We don't know why he did that exactly, perhaps for medicinal purposes, but more probably as an easy way to convince his captain that they needed to consume more liquor. Later, according to the Bacardi Rum Company, and put succinctly by Cuban playwright Federico Villolk, who said when aguardiente was replaced with rum, the Drac was to be called a mojito. Whatever its actual origins, it was Papa Hemingway who really gave the drink a boost. In addition to the daiquiri, which was his signature cocktail, he also enjoyed adding a few sprigs of mint to his rum, lime, sugar concoction, which of course makes the mojito. Rumor is that he turned his friends, like the half bikini wearing Bridget Bardot, onto the cocktail, perhaps making him the original Girls Gone Wild guy. Today, the mojito ranks as one of the most popular cocktails amongst drinkers and least popular amongst bartenders. This is because it is one of the most labor-intensive drinks known to mankind. Mint needs to be cleaned and plucked, and lime juice needs to be squeezed. The drink is then usually more muddled and then shaken. 3 glasses are used to make it, and 2 of those must be thoroughly cleaned in between making each cocktail, because wet mint has a nasty habit of sticking obstinately to glassware, even ones that have been run through a dishwasher. In spite of this, the mojito is also one of the most refreshing cocktails known to man, a mint limeade with a kick. As I went through my protracted mechanizations making my sweaty friend a high-maintenance cocktail, she must have mentioned how hot it was 3 or 4 more times, accentuating each time with a, "Can't you do something about it?" By the time her cocktail was finally prepared, my body temperature must have jumped 3 degrees. Despite the extra effort required to make the cocktail, setting it down in front of her had 2 distinctly pleasant effects. 1, the minty lime concoction probably helped her cool down a bit. And 2, the act of actually drinking it kept her mouth occupied for a bit, allowing me to return to my hidden fan without having to hear over and over again how hot it was. So anyhow, we try and have a little fun with history. One of the things about history is it can be dry if it has no color added to it. Some years back, I traveled to China with a historian who covered quite a bit of Chinese history. He's one of the funniest guys I've ever met, but his book was one of the most boring tomes I've ever read. So I think it's important for historians to inject a little bit of themselves into the history without injecting too much of it. Part of that then you become the story as opposed to presenting the story. And of course, as we know, history is one of those things that depends on perspective to really get a good idea of what's actually going on. So the next drink we're going to make is a Trader Vic's Mai Tai. Now, Trader Vic, of course, was famous for opening his place over in Emeryville. But the corporate offices for Trader Vic's actually were in Marin County for close to 35 years. It was in two different locations. One was down in Green Bay in a place that no longer exists. And the other one is also in Green Bay, but right by, if you know where the car wash is there on the east side of the freeway, it's right on the other side. There's an old building there. It's funny because it's my loan broker's office, which was the former offices for Trader Vic's worldwide. Trader Vic, of course, is known for having a place in Emeryville. But one of the things about Trader Vic is he basically stole his entire idea from Don Beachcomber in Los Angeles. The idea was this post-World War II shtick of kind of mixing a bunch of Americana things together and creating this mythologized kind of Polynesian culture, which actually doesn't exist in Polynesia. So they took some things like the Hawaiian shirt, which of course Hawaii is Polynesia, but the Hawaiians, the Hawaiian shirt actually came from Japan. He mixed in these cocktails with tropical juices, which were actually more akin to Caribbean things, and he used rum, which at the time there were no Caribbean rums made. So, or no Pacific Ocean rums made, at least that were available around here. One of the things that inspired me to get into actually writing my column was the Mai Tai itself, because back when I first started writing this column 15 years ago, people weren't in-depthly looking at a lot of cocktail history. And the Mai Tai is one of those things where at that time, I remember everything I looked up about the Mai Tai, everything I read said that Mai Tai meant out of this world. And if you think of the culture post-World War II, GIs, this kind of thing, hip or square, those kind of terms, out of this world was kind of a radical kind of way to talk. The funny thing is, of course, Mai Tai doesn't mean out of this world at all. It's a Polynesian word, it's Tahitian. And when I read that over and over and over again, I went to the San Francisco Library and got out the Polynesian to English dictionary and looked it up, and it means good, just good, plain and simple. So one of the things about both Vic and Don the Beachcomber was they really pushed this idea, and it's kitschy, but it's also so American that it's pure Americana, from the little weird tiki style things to the unusual drinks that they made. This is an original Don the Beachcomber coconut. This is original Trader Vic's coconut. All that kind of stuff kind of merged together. And it's still part of our culture. Tiki torches, rattan furniture, Hawaiian shirts, all of that is very much part of tiki culture. There are some things about it that aren't so great, but still, it's as Americana as you can get. And I love it for that reason. But one of the things is it needs updating because it went through a period of time where the ingredients for these drinks kind of became canned juices and bottled sweet and sours and things of that nature, which really altered the flavor of the drink. So we're going to make a classic Mai Tai. And when I say that with a note of sarcasm, because there's probably 4 or 5 different recipes for a Mai Tai. But we're going to make the most basic one that most Americans would understand with products that you can get and understand. So, like I said, we're going to start, unlike one of these coconuts, which you can't see the drink, which is unfortunate, worst presentation ever. We're going to use a regular glass so you can actually see the vivid colors that come together in a drink like this. So we're going to fill it with ice. set that to the side. We're going to fill our mixing glass. We're going to rinse out our other mixing glass. Ergo the mint aspect of it. And then we're going to use some white rum made by Sammy Hagar, who's also a local guy, which I don't think, if I didn't mention it enough, with Batiste. Batiste is a local company founded by Tristan Merman. He lives over in San Quentin, the town of San Quentin, not the prison, and has been there for a long time. Has been producing high quality rum, RHUM. So we also have a Marin County producer, Sammy Hagar, who produces rum. Now, both rums are made in the Caribbean. One's made, the Batiste is made in Santa Maria, and the Batiste, or the Sammy's product is made in Puerto Rico now. But both are white rums. One is a sugarcane distillate from pure run sugar juice. This one's made from molasses, has a little different flavor that comes through a little bit better in this drink. So we're going to go ahead and use an ounce of the Batiste of Sammy's rum. We're going to add a 3/4 of an ounce of orange curacao. Now, orange curacao is not the same thing as triple sec. Triple sec is an orange curacao, but orange curacao is actually orange in color. If you can't find orange curacao, the next best thing is Grand Marnier, which is quite a bit more expensive, but it gives it a little more of a sugar candy taste that is absolutely essential in this drink. So we're going to use 3/4 of an ounce of the orange curacao. And then this is the secret ingredient. This is Orzat. It's a Turkish syrup made from almonds. It's spelled O-R-G-E-A-T, but it's actually pronounced Orzat. It has a very almondy bubblegum flavor. If you can't find this, you can use amaretto, but amaretto, of course, has alcohol in it, and that can create a little different thing with what you're trying to do. This is actually a great product. It's made from real sugar, not high fructose corn syrup, but it has a great bubblegummy almond flavor that really makes this drink. So we're going to add that. An ounce of fresh squeezed lime juice. Again, I'm not squeezing this to order because that would take too much time, but always fresh squeezed. And then for this, the original Mai Tai would be that with some dark rum on top of it. But every American wants pineapple juice in it. I don't know why, but they do. So we're going to use a 1/4 ounce to a 1/2 ounce of pineapple juice. Obviously not fresh squeezed, very hard to find fresh squeezed pineapple juice. We're going to give it a quick shake to combine. And we're going to strain it into our cocktail glass. Now, the last step is we're going to take a dark rum. Our recipe calls for Batiste's dark rum. I actually don't have any, but I do have some Myers. Dark rums are typically molasses added to it, an addition. So there are gold rums, which is Batiste, which is a little bit different, but Myers has a darker color, darker flavor, and it floats on top, which gives it a beautiful presentation. We're going to garnish it with a little slice of orange and a little slice of lime. And there you have it. Trader Vic's Mai Tai. Fabulous drink. Classic, delicious, and as American as you can get, regardless of its Polynesian roots, quote unquote. So the next story I'm going to read for you actually has to do with Ernest Hemingway. Now, the reason I'm using Ernest Hemingway in this story is to illustrate a point that this was one of those other things that once you start digging around in history, sometimes you can find out things that you didn't know. And Hemingway is one of those people who it's really important to understand who he was and where he was coming from, or you don't understand why he was doing what he was doing. So this story is from my second book, 20 Years Behind Bars, Parole Denied, which came out about 4 years ago. And at any rate, it's called The Importance of Being Earnest. I'll have a Hemingway, said the shortish man, holding his glasses onto his nose with one finger. A Hemingway what? I asked, wiping my hands on the nearest bar towel. Hemingway in many ways is the archetypal drinking man. It's no surprise that Dos Equis' most interesting man in the world bears more than a passing resemblance to Mr. Hemingway. Over 50 years after his death, he still looms large in the bar world, or small, as the case may be. His daiquiri, said the man. You want a double? I asked, doing a quick pounds per ounce calculation in my head. Double drinks are rarely a good idea, no matter what your body weight is, and especially a bad idea if you are a smaller man or a woman. Blood alcohol is directly related to your weight, so the smaller you are, the less alcohol it takes to affect you. No, he said, just a regular one. Well, the Papa Doble daiquiri is a drink that Hemingway's hero in Islands in the Stream is fond of, drinking these double frozens without sugar, many of them, in fact. It has been said by Hemingway himself that if you drank that many with sugar, it would make you sick. The recipe, 2 shots of white rum, lime juice, maraschino liqueur, a splash of grapefruit juice, blended, would shock the senses of most people. Islands in the Stream was published posthumously, so many people don't realize that Hemingway drank blended daiquiris. Strong tart ones, to be sure, but the quintessential man's favorite drink was a blended drink. The only question is whether they came with little umbrellas or not. Chapter 1. Some years ago, I was at a martial arts event with my martial arts teacher. We were observing another teacher and his students putting on a demonstration. Do you notice how he holds his right hand that way? Asked my teacher. I hadn't, at least until he had pointed it out. He has a hand injury that causes him to do that. Notice how all of his students do the same thing? It was true. Even though they didn't share the injury, for some reason they shared the mannerism. It didn't make their art better, but it did make it distinguishable. Sometimes when we emulate people we admire, we emulate both the good and the bad. Hemingway didn't drink his daiquiris, or his mojitos, or his martinis, or his highballs, or his death in the afternoons, or, well, you get the point, without sugar because he didn't like sugar. It was for a more practical reason. Ernest Hemingway had diabetes, type 2 diabetes, the kind that many health professionals will tell you is directly related to diet, both solid and liquid. Hemingway also had a disease called hemochromatosis, a hereditary disease that often leads to diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a chronic condition that affects the way your body metabolizes sugar. People with this condition are warned to watch their alcohol consumption. Drinking alcohol affects how your body processes sugar. As little as 2 ounces can quickly lower your blood sugar levels. Not terribly bad for a healthy person, but quite dangerous for someone with diabetes. The experts recommend no more than 2 ounces of alcohol daily for a man with diabetes, and no more than 1 ounce for a woman. Considering that Hemingway daiquiri had 2 ounces of booze right out of the gate, the fact that it had no sugar was window dressing at best. Also consider that grapefruit juice has high amounts of sugar, as does maraschino liqueur, 3 grams per ounce and 8.9 grams per ounce, respectively. Hemingway clearly wasn't following any doctor's orders. Also considering that Hemingway also routinely drank 6 or more of these drinks, it seems that good health wasn't his highest priority. His record, actually, of Papa Dobles was reported to be 16 in one night. It seems pretty clear that even if he hadn't taken his own life in 1961, pretty soon, especially considering his condition, his drinking would have. I thought of mentioning this to the man with his single Hemingway daiquiri, but he had picked up his drink and turned to walk away while simultaneously taking a sip. His choking, snorting cough caused him to turn back around and put his drink down. Does it need some sugar? I asked. The man nodded, holding his throat while his eyes teared up behind his glasses. I guess I'm not very Hemingway-ish, he said. Something which, in the greater scheme of things, probably isn't really that bad at all, considering how things turned out for Hemingway. At any rate, the point is, a lot of this cocktail history is subjective at the very least. I had the great fortune of, when I first started writing this column, to literally stumble across a story that I couldn't believe at first. And that story is about the tequila sunrise. A friend of mine had invited me down to the Trident to talk about some of the other things that had happened at the Trident, which I was familiar with. I knew Robin Williams had worked there. I knew the Kingston Trio had owned it. I knew that Trident was actually the name of the Kingston Trio's record company. I knew quite a bit about that. Janis Joplin had been there, Crosby, Stills. What he mentioned in the course of this lunch was that the tequila sunrise had been invented there, which I found suspect to say the least, because I was pretty sure that drink had existed long before. So I started doing a little poking around, and I found out that the tequila sunrise, as we know it, actually didn't come into being until the mid-70s. So I did some digging, and I talked to the guy who actually invented it, Bobby Lozoff, who was a bartender there and now lives in Hawaii. Great guy. And he told me the story about the Rolling Stones coming to a party at the Trident and him having invented this drink and giving it to them. And I thought, that's a great story. All I need now is to get the Rolling Stones to confirm that, and I can run that story. Well, of course, the Rolling Stones never returned any of my phone calls. But about a year later, Keith Richards released a book called Life, in which he named one of the chapters the 1975 Rolling Stones tour, nicknamed the Cocaine and Tequila Sunrise Tour. So I revisited the whole thing and put the whole story together for National Geographic, which ran it. And it eventually became the basis for a series of commercials made by Jose Cuervo. But the point is that the Tequila Sunrise name had been invented at the Built Down Hotel in Arizona, but that drink bore almost no resemblance to the drink that Bobby had. And Bobby basically told me he had taken that drink and started stripping ingredients out of it and added a few of his own until he came upon the Tequila Sunrise drink, which is what we know nowadays as probably the third most popular and certainly third most famous tequila drink there is. Everyone knows a margarita. A lot of people know a Paloma, but after you name those two, the only drink specific to tequila that most people can come up with is a Tequila Sunrise. Everything else is basically a derivative of something else. A tequila Bloody Mary isn't a new drink, it's an old drink. So anyhow, so I'm gonna make for you today the Bobby Lozoff Trident Tequila Sunrise. Now, you can follow along here. We also just did a video for Marin Dish, which is a video series I do called Meet Your Makers, which has videos with local bartenders and myself making their local drink at the local spots. You can find that on marindish.com, or you can listen to my podcast, Barfly Podcast on iTunes, as was mentioned, where we cover a lot of this. But I'm going to make it right now. It's very pretty. It's very simple, but it starts on a premise that's different than most cocktail things. And that is you don't mix the drink. So it's not actually technically a mixed drink, it's a layered drink. And you'll see why that's important when we start making it. So we're gonna fill our glass with ice. One of the things about a cocktail is the original Tequila Sunrise glass would be something like this. This is very passé at this time. I don't think it attractively portrays this drink, and you'll see why when I'm done. So we're also going to use another local product. We're going to use another Sammy Hagar product, which is, one of the things about dealing with Marin liquor is there's not a whole lot of them. There's Moylan's, there's Square One, there's a few others, right? There's Santo Batiste and a couple others. But really, the market is pretty thin on Marin County alcohol, which is unfortunate considering Marin County's history. Sonoma County, on the other hand, has hundreds of them. So ironically, they don't have nearly as much cocktail history as we do, but that's a topic for another day. At any rate, so we're going to go ahead and make the sunrise. We're going to add 1.5 ounces of Blanco tequila. You can use Reposado, but you're actually looking for a clear liquor at the bottom here, which makes a big difference. We're going to add about 1/2 ounce of fresh squeezed lime. We're going to add 1.5 ounces of fresh squeezed orange juice. And again, we're doing these in a specific order to achieve a specific effect. We're going to add a little more ice because that kind of settles. Now, this is the one ingredient that many people don't put in it. It's creme de cassis. We're also going to use pomegranate. We're going to use fresh local pomegranate, an actual pomegranate. Most pomegranate syrups these days are just artificially dyed high fructose corn syrup. But cassis is actually a bitter fruit that is most famous for the Kir Royale or the Kir itself, but it adds a beautiful color. You're going to want to pour it down the center, just a little bit, just to get this little kind of bottom layer. Then we're going to add a little bit of grenadine. And what that does is it creates this remarkable sunrise effect. Well, like I said, most drinks garnish it with a little bit of orange, a little bit of lime. You can use a maraschino cherry if you'd like. But the idea is the presentation of this drink is one thing. The actual construction of it is different. If you were to actually drink this, you'd want to give it a little stir because that's where the flavor is. But that's Bobby Lozoff's classic Tequila Sunrise as introduced to the Rolling Stones and taken all over the world. And the amazing thing about the Tequila Sunrise is I've seen it on cocktail menus in Tokyo, in Rome, in Paris, in England, all over in the Caribbean, all over the world. One of the most famous drinks possibly ever made. And it was invented right here in Sausalito by Bobby Lozoff at the Trident restaurant. They do a house one there now. Like I said, they push this pretty hard, but it's actually a great thing, and it's right here in our backyard. So that's pretty much the three drinks that we have. We're going to go ahead and open it up for some questions now, and go from there.
Thanks, Jeff. I did not know that about the Tequila Sunrise. Who would have imagined?
Again, in my own backyard. The funny thing was I had just gotten back from a trip to Europe and a trip to Kentucky where I was doing stories. And the guy told me this story, and I thought, here I traveled halfway around the world. And the best story that I've ever encountered was right in, literally a mile and a half from where I work, which I thought was funny. So that's that old idea is you can be a prophet in your own hometown. You just got to look around.
Great.
So,
well, we're gonna give everybody a minute to, for those who have joined us today, we appreciate the great turnout. If you'd like to do under Q&A, you can type in a question or a comment. You can use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen, or there's a little hand you can click to raise your hand, and then you can ask Jeff a question or make a comment. And while they do that,
yeah, I've been looking, Joe. I don't see anything on my screen yet.
No, but give people a minute. I know.
Yeah,
that,
no hurry, no rush.
I was going to mention that that the town of Ross, of course, for which we have our historical archives. The namesake James Ross was in the liquor wholesale business. That was his source of a great deal of his wealth came from being a wholesale liquor distributor in San Francisco from 1851 to 1857. And so there's a little bit of a liquor history with respect to Ross there.
Well, that I did not know that. That's fascinating. Back then the rules regarding liquor were pretty wide open, right? What we've come to take for granted now have only been around since the early 60s, right? The standards of identity identifying actually what liquor is only started in 1963, which is amazing. You can also think of some other things. It was illegal in California for a woman to be a bartender until the early 1970s. Illegal, which it's kind of hard to believe, right? But it was funny because if you read the original law, which has been stricken off the books and actually removed because it's pretty offensive, women were of low moral character, which I thought was hilarious that law existed until the early 1970s in California.
Oh my gosh! Well,
yeah. One other little point I would like to make out is
I think we have 3 questions.
Okay, one quick point before is all of these products now, because of the pandemic, you can order liquor to go. So you can actually order any of these products online and have them delivered to your house, which won't last forever, but is mighty convenient nowadays. You can get them, Bevmo, a couple other ones, but literally you can go to some of the websites like Santo or a Beach Bar or Batiste, and they will deliver to your house, which is a new thing that they've done for the pandemic, which has been wonderful for the restaurant business and wonderful for the liquor business, because otherwise God only knows what would happen. But anyhow, that's something I wanted to point out. You can also order cocktails to go from your local restaurants. You can call them up and go pick them up. They're already pre-made. You don't have to worry about buying all this stuff and trying to figure it out on your own. It's always much easier when someone else is doing it for you. Anyhow, we can go on to the questions.
Let's see.
Okay, if I can start, here's one that came from your last drink. Wasn't some unusual percent of tequila sold in Marin because of the sunrise?
Yes. Well, remember also.
Any perspective on that?
Well, the original tequila was Jose Cuervo, and that's a great thing about tequila is really new on the scene as far as the types of tequila available. Back then, I mean, tequila was really rock. You've got to consider a lot of these liquors that we think of as premium never started out to be premium. Bourbon's a great example. Never designed to be a quality product. No, made from high fructose corn syrup, put in burn barrels to look old fast. Those types of things were not designed to make the product taste better, right? It's only after the fact, now that they've been applying Scotch techniques to American whiskey, are we getting better tasting whiskeys than we've ever had before. So the thing with tequila is tequila broke into the American market in the 60s. Part of it was part and parcel of the people bringing marijuana up from Mexico into California. So the hippie culture here, all of that sort of thing. Well, if you're down there getting Mexican pot, you're drinking Mexican booze because that's all they've got, right? There's that great scene from Three Amigos with Steve Martin and Martin Short. What do you got here? Well, we got tequila and beer. That's what they had. So that's what they brought back. And that found a different market than the other market, or maybe they cross over somewhere. But the idea is that it was part of the same cultural zeitgeist that happened. The newer things like a reposado, which is rested tequila, or añejo tequila, came along much later. And one of the things with tequila that's very different than other products is they started off making it as good as they could make it. And there's really nowhere to go from there. So it doesn't age like other products, and it doesn't do some of these things. So it's kind of locked into this thing, and which is both good and bad. But the laws governing tequila allow for a wide range of flavors. So but a lot of that can be traced directly to the trident. In fact, Jose Cuervo was so appreciative of what they had done, they put the recipe on the back of their bottle, right? Remember, Jose Gold, right, is not a quality product. These are mixto tequilas, which means they're actually not 100% blue agave. Jose Cuervo now does make some 100% blue agaves, but you've got to be careful reading the labeling because their gold still says made with blue agave, which is not the same thing as made from blue agave. So that's one of those little tricks that they use. They use a sugar distillate for half the product in gold and some of their other products. But their premium products are actually quite good. The Reserva de Familia is fabulous. They do a lot of other Tradicional, which is good. But yes, so the answer is yes, that the Trident alone was responsible for an astronomical amount of tequila because it was an incredibly busy restaurant. Still is. It's one of those things that, I mean, they're probably the second busiest restaurant in Marin County and rarely get any press as that because most of their business is tourists. But it's a great restaurant, lots of seating, great place to go. Anyhow, I hope that answered the question.
Sure. Another one came from a participant who maybe was just getting started here earlier, and missed the name of the book and author for the How to Mix Drinks written while at the Raffel Hotel. Can you just repeat?
So what was the author's name?
If you could just repeat that.
Yeah, I'll show you actually. This is the original book. So this is actually released in the I believe the 20s is the, let me double check here. 1907, excuse me. So this is the original. This is Anchor Distilling's reproduction of the book. So it's Cocktail Boothby is his name, William Boothby. And it has a couple of names. It's either called The American Bartender or The World's Drinks and How to Mix Them. You can find, I probably can't find this, but you can find various versions of it at Amazon or whatnot. It's a great old tale One of my favorites is he has the 10 Commandments for bartenders at the end, which the advice that he gives is as true then or as true now as it was then. So it's a great read if you want to read that. Again, written at the Rafael Hotel in San Rafael, and Cocktail Boothby is one of the most famous San Francisco bartenders of the so-called golden age of bartending, which is one of those terms that I always get a kick out of. I had lunch with my fellow columnist at the IJ, Barry Tompkins, and he said something I thought was very important. He goes, "These are the days now," right? We live in the moment. It's wonderful to have history, but remember, we're creating history now. And right now is the golden age of cocktails because there are more products, better products, more widely available, plus the internet to guide you than there ever has been in the history of drinks, and that makes it great. So anywhere you go, you can get any one of these drinks because everyone has a phone and everyone has the internet, and they can find all these ingredients. They can be delivered to their houses. It's a fabulous time to be making drinks. Did that answer?
Here's one from the chat line and something good. Oh, yeah. Did we get the answer? I think we could also put that on the website afterward. Let's see. Just navigate the Q&A. Here's one I often hear, the martini. Someone heard it was invented at the Occidental Hotel in San Francisco. Do you have any information on that?
Well, the martini is one of those drinks where you realize that it probably was invented in several places. And one of the things, much like with the tequila sunrise, you realize that there's a difference between inventing a drink and naming a drink. Much just like the El Drac is, no one remembers the El Drac, but they know what a mojito is. And so if you think of the Buena Vista in San Francisco, which is world famous for the Irish coffee, they didn't invent the Irish coffee. The Irish coffee was invented at the Dublin airport, not in San Francisco. But the Buena Vista has done more to promote the Irish coffee than any place else on the planet and sells 1 million of them a year, typically. So the point being is whether the drink was invented at the Occidental Hotel, which I highly doubt, or whether it was invented in Martinez, which I doubt even more, because Martinez went to the extent of putting a giant marker in the middle of town saying the martini was invented here. And then they list the ingredients for their martini, which is Old Tom gin, sweet vermouth, and bitters. Now, I'll tell you what, I made a lot of martinis in my day. If I ever made one of those for somebody, they'd spit it out right in front of me. That is not a martini, not in any way, shape, or form. None of those ingredients would appear in a modern martini. So the idea that that is the precursor to the martini is highly speculative at best. And just because someone sticks a historical marker somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that's an accurate representation of the truth. More than likely, what happened was the idea that the martini is a gin-based drink, which of course gin was the king of cocktails. It was pretty much the base spirit for 75 years for American cocktails. Vodka came along much later. Whiskey had been less popular at the beginning, but gin was kind of the king. So almost every cocktail that you can think of originally starts with gin, from the Bloody Mary to even the Tequila Sunrise, which is almost a sling, if you want to look at it that way. At any rate, so the idea of combining American gin with premium French vermouth isn't that big of a stretch. So it probably was invented at several different places. And the name, from the research I've done, I think comes most likely from Martini and Rossi. And the funny thing is, if you go to Europe these days and you order a martini, if you don't specify that you're an American or they don't glean that right away, what you're going to get is vermouth. And it's either going to be a combination of sweet and dry vermouth, or it's just going to be sweet vermouth. They don't make cocktails in Europe like we make them here. So the idea is that a martini most likely is based on the name Martini and Rossi. I doubt it was invented at any one place. I know plenty of places try and take credit for it. But again, that's why the tequila sunrise thing is rare, that you can find a moment in time where something definitely happened and move forward from that moment. And again, in cocktail lore, that is incredibly rare because the Manhattan, the Martini, the daiquiri, the mojito, all of these drinks, except for the tequila sunrise, you got to take some of these stories with a grain of salt. Tequila sunrise, again, you can actually call the guy who made the drink and talk to him in person, which I've done on a number of occasions. So that's a kind of a different thing, right? It's just like Ian Fleming. What did Ian Fleming mean when he wrote these things? We don't know, because Ian Fleming is no longer with us. So same with Hemingway. What was he trying to say? Remember, the famous thing about Hemingway is people don't realize he drank a blended daiquiri. Blended. That's what he liked, because Islands in the Stream was published posthumously. That was about 10 years after he died was when he actually, that story came out and told people that, but that was 50 years after his legend had been established. So that's one of those things where if you know the actual history, it's different than the history that came to pass, or that people regurgitate ad nauseum these days. Anyhow, so hopefully that answers your question, or dodges the question, as we journalists love to do.
Thanks. I have two related questions, and I don't know if this is more than you want to take on at one time, but what are the 10 commandments for bartenders? And of those, can you name a favorite and why?
Well, most of these, I don't want to go through them all because it's a whole page and a half. But he talks about cleanliness, customer service, and things of that nature, which are as relevant today as they are there. He talks about weeding out the bad eggs quickly, right? Don't let them develop into a problem. All those types of things, I think, are important. And listen to the customer. And the irony is, in this modern age of mixology, so many of these mixologists tell people things instead of asking them things. So a lot of them have lost sight of the customer in the equation. And that old adage, the customer is always right, is bandied around a lot. But what the actual original saying was the customer is never wrong. And what that means is they're never wrong in their tastes. That's a whole different thing. And so this notion of, like, I've had people tell me that's not how you make a Manhattan. That's not how you do a martini. And it's like there are 1,000 recipes for all of these drinks. So who is the person who's going to say that they are the only one who knows what that is, right? The object of bartending is customer service, and that's delivering to your customer what they want, not what you want. And that's gotten lost, I think, in this mixology thing. And it's one of these things that I don't appreciate about it.
Good lessons, more than bartending.
I did do the last chapter in my book is the 4 Noble Truths about bartending. And those are basically what I just told you right there. Listen to the customer, right? Because the customer is who you're there for. If you're there for yourself, that's not a pleasing arrangement for anybody involved. So what was the other question that you had?
I think it was just of those, what were the favorite and why? Unless,
well, like I said,
Joe has
the idea that the customer is the number.
Yeah.
A bar without customers is just a big empty building, right?
Right. Anything to add, Joe?
Hi, Frank. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add. I think we're running up on the end of our discussion here.
Are those 2 chats questions? There's 2 chats on the screen.
Yeah, I think we covered the chat. Let's look again. That has to do with the Occidental Hotel. They did mention it was a well-known bartender named Jerry, but I think you covered the histories of the drink.
And again, remember, the part of the thing about bartending in particular is trying to take credit for something that you didn't do. That happens all the time in this industry. Because that's the notoriety. And one of my favorite stories about that I discovered is the Bloody Mary has this history with Harry's Bar in Paris and the Savoy in London go back and forth over who invented it. They kept pushing it back a year, and they eventually pushed it back before the invention of tomato juice, which is hilarious because you can't make a Bloody Mary if you don't have tomato juice. And if it hasn't been invented yet, I don't know what you're doing. Right, but that's one of those things where people don't look at the facts before they try and move the goalposts on that. So that was a very funny fact to find out.
Well, Jeff, this has been very enjoyable. I think I'm going to have to try all 3 of those. probably not in one sitting, but
Well, again,
We-
the unfortunate thing is the last time when we did the in-person thing, we could actually try them in person, which was a wonderful thing to do. Maybe at some point in the future, we can revisit that.
all right. Do you
We do have a
favorite
link on our
drink?
website to those recipes are on our website. We can keep them there.
Do I have a favorite drink?
Yeah.
It depends. I'm a big whiskey fan. So right now I'm a big fan of Japanese whiskey. I think it's incredibly well made. It's awfully expensive, unfortunately, but a lot of what they're doing is very interesting. I think a lot of American whiskey makers, as a result of being bought by either Suntory or the other guys, have had to modify their approach, and I think that's only good for American whiskey. I think better quality ingredients, better quality production is only going to help everybody out.
All right. Well, look forward to trying that too.
Okay.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much for your time. And we have the flyer has your website on it. So anybody is interested in getting Jeff's books, I'm sure there's a link there, or go to Amazon. And
They're also available. A lot of ironically, the car washes around here carry a lot of them. Sausalito Stationery carries it. Of course, Book Passage does. So, but you can order them on Amazon. You can Barnes & Noble, anywhere. They're widely available. Check out my the podcasts on Barfly Podcast on anywhere you source podcasts, and check out the Marin Dish, which is a new website coming up, directing people to food, cocktails, and entertainment. A big part of that. So meet your maker. They're a fun series of how-to videos with local bartenders. Check it out.
all right.
And I might add that this presentation will be available on our website within the next couple days.
All right.
Cheers.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Everybody, that concludes the program. Everybody have a wonderful day and have a drink on us.
All right.